Understanding Ourselves, Part 4, Emotional Development of Problems. Our emotions, in the Greek word, is blognon, or bowels, a deep reactionary feeling, do not have a function of their own. Rather, they are the natural reaction to our understanding of reality as to whether our sense of significance or security is being met or not. Counseling is an effort to help people learn right thinking or thoughts that lead to firm beliefs, then to develop healthy values that program the unconscious mind, which then guide the heart to choose the convictions for right behaviors or directions in life. That results in right feelings, which then promote the motivation for wise and godly living. Feelings are a deceiving and uncertain guide for clarity and right living. We can feel happy temporarily about unhealthy, disobedient living and temporarily sad or hurt as a result of good decisions in God's will. The Christian life is not meant to be a laughing, festive frenzy of euphoric emotional highs, but rather the emotions described from the Spirit are love, an unending compassion for the undeserved, joy, a deep sense of eternal fulfillment for pleasing Jesus, and peace, a profound calm and confidence of never being rejected or abandoned by Jesus. Even with this awareness, feelings of guilt, anger, anxiety, resentment, sorrow, anguish, frustration, discontent, and worry can be experienced either the vanity of worldly goals or in reaping the consequences of fleshly disobedience, or the acceptance of a deceiving philosophy or satanic lie as do what you want. God has to forgive you, or God will not punish you. This lesson will analyze how problems develop and how to handle the different emotions and reactions possible. For the true believer, no situation or person can take away his personal worth or secure acceptance before Christ. He does not have to prove anything to anyone. The Christian evaluates life situations from God's perspectives and purpose, then chooses to behave as God commands him with compassion for others, trusting in His wisdom. His self-worth is derived from how he benefits others and demonstrates the fruit of the Spirit. This, you see, is really living. On the contrary, the Christian, living without a knowledge of God's wisdom and plan, rather continuing to think with a secular and carnal perspective, behaves selfishly with worldly goals, maybe disobediently with fleshly gratification, and following Satan's lies. For example, life is all about me, without compassion or interest in others. He can think, act, and feel just like an unbeliever. What a waste. He needs the renovation of his mind in Romans 12:2. Most well-adjusted people live by setting goals for themselves, assuming their goals will meet their needs physically and emotionally. They work hard, plan carefully, and if they are fortunate, they reach their self-centered goals. They have money, nice kids, a home, good health, business, prestige, etc. Whatever they value or believe will bring them prosperity and happiness. These folks seldom feel a need for God. They're fine without Him. If they are Christians, they worship God because He prospers them, or they hope He will. And if He gets in the way of their goals or sends them a crisis, they're quick to abandon Him. Meanwhile, to tell them their deepest needs are unmet falls on deaf ears. When everything goes according to plan, people do feel good and reasonably satisfied. Unbelievers do not want to see that the end of their way is a personal death for eternity, without meaning or love. But they don't care. They prefer to enjoy what they can now. Others, when they reach their goal, discover a shallow or passing satisfaction that is a delusion or disappointment. Either they redouble their efforts for bigger goals and seek more prosperity, or admit the vanity of it all and drift into despair and often self-destructive behaviors. Is there a way out of this vicious spiral? People generally do not seek help until a problem develops. Counselors must have a way to diagnose a problem and then guide the person on a path that can overcome the issue, while bringing some sense of personal worth. The key element behind most problem symptoms is an obstacle that interferes with them reaching their chosen goal. If the obstacle can be overcome by changing the conviction of a goal-oriented behavior, then the threat of failure or frustration is minimized or avoided. When the threat cannot be overcome, then certain symptoms become evident. For example, one might say, "I cannot make my husband to love me," or "No matter how hard I try, I keep making mistakes." Such frustrations tend to fall into one of three categories. 1. Unreached goals. 2. External circumstances. And 3. Fear of failure. Some psychologists estimate that 95% of counseling focuses on these three issues. Any obstacle to a chosen goal generates a frustrating emotion to people that is perceived by distinct emotional forms. If the goal desired is unreachable, the usual emotional response is guilt or a feeling of worthlessness, blaming or hating oneself. If the goal desired is reachable, but some external circumstance blocks the accomplishment, the typical response is resentment. Anger at this intervention can be accompanied by irrational and abusive action to eliminate the obstacle. If the goal desired is neither reachable nor impeded by external circumstances, but if a debilitating fear of failure is perceived, the emotional response is some form of anxiety, followed by some form of self-protective behavior. Most personal difficulties stem from symptoms of frustration resulting in guilt, resentment, or anxiety. Beginning with number 1, an unreachable goal. Objects that cannot be reached regardless of how hard they try. These can be fantasies like a C student wanting to become a medical doctor. Or a case study is of a woman raised in constant criticism, unfavorable comparisons, and constant rejection, which are usually cruel manipulative techniques for discipline or negative motivation that produce a belief that she needed to be perfect to be loved and accepted. But she made mistakes. So later, when corrected, she felt destroyed. The worse her feelings of guilt for failing turns to self-hatred, disgust with herself, and loss of motivation to try again. She needed an understanding of an unconditional acceptance in Christ and from companions who vocally loved her repeatedly, just as she is. Secondly, we have external circumstances. When the goal seems to be reachable, but something beyond the person's control or responsibility blocks the accomplishment. The emotional response is resentment, which can motivate an angry aggression. For example, the government changed the tax rules and businesses are forced into bankruptcies. Or a person does not respond as expected in sex, love, security, etc. And anger is the response. For example, of a woman with various symptoms from headaches to depression to hating her family. She believed she needed her family to accept her and approve of her, but when she perceived that they did not, they became the obstacle to her goal. Her growing internal bitterness could not be expressed, lest it further their rejection. She tried to change her husband and parents to meet her needs of acceptance, but failed. Soon, symptoms of psychosomatic ailments appeared, seemingly as a result of her resentment. She needed to change her assumptions or thoughts of what she needed from her family and to accept God's unconditional love as sufficient to meet her needs, then to be able to share her needs with her understanding husband, finally to give up trying to change everyone to please her. Thirdly, a fear of failure. This can be felt in jobs, sports, or family responsibilities that can seem to be overwhelming. husbands often feel they are inadequate or might not be good enough for the task. So he retreats into an anxious indecision or apathy. Maybe he's afraid he will fail to be good enough, and his wife's criticisms confirm it. His thought might be, if I try and fail, I'll have to admit that I'm a failure and my self-concept will hurt. I'd rather not try so I can avoid failure. He'd rather delegate the family to his wife. The truth is, never trying is what guarantees failure. In the short term, he prefers this self-protection mode of living. In a case study of a young man has a goal of getting a date or whatever, and he believes his goal is attainable and accessible. The solid line in the graph represents what's called the approach gradient. It rises as he approaches her to ask her for a date. The rise indicates he wants it more intensely. However, as he begins to feel uneasy or nervous, he's scared she will say no. The ragged line is the avoidance gradient or fear level. Where the two lines meet, the fear of failure becomes more intense than the desire to reach the goal. If he backs off, the desire for the goal remains strong. He may attempt to call her phone several times while within the circle before pushing on against the fear or backing off and giving up. This is similar to the desire of jumping off a high diving board and backing off several times before finally daring to do it. This emotional experience is anxiety, when the obstacle is fear of failure. Then we have the progression of emotional problems. The pre-neurotic emotional experiences are guilt, resentment, and anxiety. At this stage, the individual is willing to evaluate the effectiveness of his goal-oriented behavior again and again and adopt new strategies that give promise of reaching the goal. They are angry with their world, resentment, or they may feel down on themselves, guilt, and live under a cloud of constant tension and fear. That's anxiety. But they keep trying out of duty. They just kind of grind it out. Their goal is to keep on keeping on regardless. This can easily shift into a neurotic experience or symptomatic patterns to avoid further hurt or insult to self-esteem. Neurotics are no longer trying to overcome the obstacle to their goal. Their goal now is safety and protect whatever self-worth that remains after repeated failures. The classic form of this disorder are phobias, sexual dysfunction, obsessive-compulsive neurosis, especially perfectionism. The case study may be of a man who developed a fear of crossing the only bridge into the town where he had been promoted to a new job. However, his new task was more difficult and seemed threatening. That's his fear of failure. His fear of crossing the bridge conveniently forced him to resign the new job, a timely excuse to avoid the job threat. They will avoid frustration at all cost. They never feel good about themselves or their situation, nor experience any sense of personal value or worth, but they feel safe from hurts. Then this can shift into psychosis experiences that are a complete break from the painful world. I've had enough pain. I'll withdraw entirely into my own safety zone. A personal isolation is my only escape, they would think. Many psychosomatic symptoms can be the results of unhealthy emotional states from guilt, resentment, and anxiety, such as ulcers, headaches, or skin conditions, to blindness, which have no biological explanation. Symptoms discovered in counseling have a functional significance, often unconsciously designed to either overcome the obstacle in pre-neurosis or more than likely to avoid further frustration by providing a safety excuse to avoid the obstacle again. That would be neurosis. When there's no response or change from normal counseling, there is likely a deeper problem that should be referred to a medical or psychiatrist. Our final study will lay out a graphic strategy for helping a person rebuild or renew his mind or thinking that will result in a transformed life Christ can give. Until the mind has been transformed, according to Romans 12:2, the emotional reactions will remain the same as before accepting Christ. Paul wrote, "Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus," Philippians 2:5. And this is the secret of the victorious life.